Hello and welcome to the third part of the After Effects tutorial series, Getting Started with iExpressions. In this series, you learn how to work with mamoworld iExpressions in After Effects. iExpressions is an extension that allows you to use expressions without writing a single line of program code. Hence, this expert feature becomes very easy to use and allows you to work in After Effects in a simple, efficient and creative way. In today's part, you learn how to create different kinds of random text. We also use again linking expressions to avoid unnecessary keyframes. This keeps your project clean and efficient and allows you to experiment with different variants much faster. Yeah, welcome back to this third part of this series here. And while in the previous parts I've shown you different iExpressions that basically act on positions or transparency or stuff like this of layers, now I want to show you how to create texts, so the source text of text layers with the help of iExpressions, and in particular we are looking at random text. So what I have here in this composition is, in addition to some shy background that I've hidden here because I don't need it at the moment, I just have here some simple text layer, random text, and this is just a layer I created here with this text tool, and now we want to modify this text here using some iExpressions. For this I go to the library, and in the library I go to the source text category. So in this category you find different kinds of expressions that act on the source text property of text layers. So they actually generate or modify text. And in particular, we have here random text. And in this random text, we have different kinds of iExpressions. The random text simple just creates a single line of random text. And this random text shifting does the same, but that the text shifts or scrolls from left to right or right to left, however you like. Random text template is a bit more advanced, quite powerful, but I'm not going to show it here. And then we have the same as here, random text simple and shifting, also with random text block simple and shifting. And this just creates multi-line text, an entire block of text, and we choose the shifting one which moves over time. So we click OK. And if we apply it as it is here to this text layer, so I just select here the layer and hit apply, what we get is here that the text is replaced by such a random text of zeros and ones. I enable here auto apply to update all my changes, and if you wonder to which property is it actually applied, well, it has been applied here to the text source text property. If you open this here, you can see here is now an expression active, the iExpression random text block shifting. So if you want to manipulate it later, you need to select it here and load it in your interface. Okay, so what we can change of this text block is obviously its size. So if we go here to 50, for example, it is much larger here in Y direction. This was probably a bit much, maybe more like 15. Okay, and here we can also give it more letters. Now we have 50 letters here, or we can even do 55. So now we have here a nice random text filling this entire region. And the next thing I want to set is the alphabet. So I can go here and go here, for example, except for binary for numbers. And now we have here arbitrary other numbers, or I can choose letters, where these letters here are just small letters, and here we have a mixture of small and capital letters, or here just capital letters and also some other things. Here some hex values. We can also choose here alphabet custom, which is pretty interesting because then it takes just here this custom alphabet, which currently means it consists just of A's, B's and C's. And since this A here is here written 3 times, it means A occurs 3 times as much as the B or the C. And if I extend this here, let's say we want to have also a lot of question marks inside, and I go here somewhere else, it updates, and you can see now these letters are also included. Another thing you can also include are spaces. by just clicking here, you get some additional spaces in your alphabet. You can also, of course, if you use a custom alphabet, just put some spaces here inside to control exactly the number of spaces that you want to have. Okay, the next thing, or if you look at this, what we get is some random text here moving from right to left with a speed of 0.5, which means 0.5 means 0.5 characters of this text here, or letters per frame. This means every 2 frames it moves 1 letter to the left. Of course, we can also move up and down using this one here. So if I put here, for example, also 0.5, we should get kind of a diagonal movement here, not just in this direction, but also upwards. You can see now it moves here in a diagonal fashion. And you can change the speed and the direction here. You can also put here negative numbers to move it into the other direction. Another thing that I want to mention here is this loop option. And this means when the text here shifts 1 letter to the right, the letters that disappear here exactly appear here as they have been here. So there are no new letters coming here, but it's actually the letters from here reappearing here if you have enabled this loop. This has 2 benefits. The first is that this can be computed much faster. So if you disable this, it will be a little bit slower. And also it has the advantage that you can create easily endless loops. So if you have the letters here reappearing here, you just need to wait until all characters moved here from left to right in total. So in other words, if we have 55 characters here next to each other, and every 2 frames they move 1 character, this means after 2 times 55, or after 110 frames, you have exactly the same picture as in the beginning, which is then perfect to get endless looping cycles if you have enabled here this loop. To finish the overview over these options here, you also have here a randomness parameter, and this randomness is important when you want to have several copies of your random text. So assume that you have here 10 text layers and each of them has this expression applied. If you have enabled here this change for each layer, then each of them will have a different random text in it. Sometimes you don't want this, so assume that you want a second copy of exactly this random text here in a duplicated layer below it, let's say to blur it, to get some kind of shiny effect or something like this. If you want to create an exactly identical copy, you can just remove this question mark here, and you will get another random text. If you now duplicate it, the duplicate will have exactly the same random text. So if you have this, and then let's say you have 10 random texts in your composition, and you want always just 2 of them to be identical, you can start moving here the random seed. This means with having disabled this, the same layers or 2 layers will have the same random text only if they have the same random seed, meaning you can just get another bunch of layers and apply it with a random seed of 10, and then this other bunch of layers will have another random text than the one that has here the random seed of 0. You can also play with this random seed if you say, in principle I like this random text, but I do not want to have this one. Please give me just some other one. So I can put this here to 2, click somewhere else, and I get another random text. Okay, so as you've seen in the preview, what we actually want to create is not just one simple random text here, but we want to transition between 2 random texts, where the one random text consists of letters, like this, and the second random text consists of binary numbers. And actually I've already prepared this second one. It is here in a layer that I've made shy to do not disturb you at the beginning. So here I have another random text. This one is actually a copy of this one, except that I have already animated its opacity. So here it is invisible, and now here over these keyframes it changes to an opacity of 100 and is now visible here. So no expression is here applied to it yet, so let's apply this expression, but not with letters, but with binary. So I have to disable here auto apply, because otherwise these changes here would directly be applied to this layer, to our original layer here, which we do not want to modify anymore, but now we want to take here this copy and Let's just solo this copy here for a moment, and maybe here make the background black. So this is our random text here, and I'd select its source text or the layer itself, doesn't matter, and apply now these expressions with binary. Yeah, now we have here our copy with binary numbers. Okay, and this already ticely fades in here. Yeah, here it's black, and now here it slowly becomes visible. And if you look at the timeline a little bit longer, here it disappears again, and here it appears again, and disappears, appears, and so on. So I've keyframed this a little bit. And now what we want is, I unsolo this here again. When the 1 is appearing, I actually want this other text to disappear. Yeah, so what we could do is keyframe this here accordingly. In other words, go here and say, okay, this has an opacity of 0. So here I just hit T to reveal the opacity. Here I want to keyframe this to 100. And then here, when this is 100, I want this to be 0. And then here I set another keyframe. And then here this other one disappears again. Oops, I removed the keyframes. This was actually not intended. I just actually wanted to click here, so set another keyframe and then go here and then put this to 100 and so on. Yeah, so you could keyframe this here as exactly the opposite of this one here. But you can imagine, so the nice thing is now you have what you want. When the one text appears, the other disappears and so on. But it's very cumbersome, and if you have many keyframes here, you have many keyframes here. And if you start playing with those keyframes, if you want to modify them later, you also need to modify these keyframes here. So this is a tutorial about iExpressions, and you can imagine you can do this much nicer without any keyframes here. So therefore, let's remove these keyframes here again. Instead, we want to use some linking. So you know some linking iExpressions already from the second part of this tutorial series, and one we already briefly discussed are the average, sorry, not the average ones, but the linear link iExpressions. Yeah, these linear links, I said, are useful to link some stuff to some slider, to some 1D value, and what we used it for was to animate stuff according to the audio, because the slider we linked it to was our audio amplitude. And in a similar way, we can also use as the slider the opacity. And as we now want to control with such an opacity the opacity of another layer, we go to the linear link 1D iExpression. Yeah, because opacity is a 1D property. Go here. And again, this here is the slider that we want to use to control whatever else we want to do it with it. And so we, of course, want to now have this opacity to control the opacity of this layer. So we link it to this. And now we have to give what is the minimum and the maximum value of this opacity. And it's definitely 0 and 100. And then we want to apply it to this property. And now we must tell, okay, what value should this have when this one is at its minimum? Well, when this is 0, the result, this one should definitely be 100. And when the first opacity is 100, this second opacity here should definitely be 0 too. So I basically just swapped these values with these ones here. And if we now apply this here, you can see that when this one is 0, this one is 100. And when this one is 50, this is 50. And when this here is 100, this is 0. So it basically now, or it exactly behaves as the opposite of this opacity. So with such a linear link, this can easily be done, that you control one opacity with the help of the other, such that one is like the inverse of the other one. Yeah, when the one appears, the other one disappears. Very nice. I also want to show you a second option how you can do this, because, well, with a linear link, such things work if you have here a 1D property. Yeah, so if this opacity should be the opposite of this one, there are several ways how to achieve such thing with iExpressions, and in particular you can also do this with the simple link. So, and this does not just work for 1D but also for 2D or 3D properties. So I select here the simple link 1D, and if you remember, the simple link just connects one property to another one. So in this case, we have this opacity here that we want to link to this opacity here. So I override this old expression here by this one now, apply. And since the simple link by its default does not do any modifications to the value, when this one is 100, this one is also 100. And when this one is 50, this is also 50. And when this is 0, this is also 0. That's just directly connected to it, similar to parenting. But with our links, we always have here these advanced linking options. Yeah, I already explained a bit this offset. So if I set here, for example, 20 and reapply it, maybe let's also enable here auto apply. This means when this is 0, this is 20. Yeah, 20 more. And when this here is 100, this is also 100. Actually, it is 120, but opacity cannot have a value below above 100, therefore it's not shown. When this is 50, this is 70. Yeah, it's always 20 more. Okay, this is not what we want, so I set this here back. Here you can create some like temporal delay or delay in time, that when this here grows to 100, this one grows to 100 a little bit later. This is also not what we want. But what we want is actually we want to scale. Yeah. The first thing we could do is we could scale this only 50%. This means when this here is 50, this is actually only 25. And when this here is 100, this is only 50. Yeah, so it's always just half of it, because I've just scaled it 50% here, the link. Now we can also scale it by minus 100%, which basically says flip our values. Yeah. Now you can see when this is 0, this is 0. When this here is 100, this is also 0. This is because when this is 0, this is 0. When this is 100, this is minus 100. And since the opacity cannot have a value of minus 100, it is rounded to 0. Yeah, so it's always 0, not very interesting. What we need to change is the value that it scales around. So we do not want, when this here is 100, this to be minus 100, but we want it to scale around a different value. So the value you put here means this is the value at which both should be identical. Yeah, and so like the center of around which you flip, and the center around which you flip is the value of 50, because at the value of 50 both of them should be identical. Yeah, so if you now look at this change, we have here when one has a value of 50, the other one has also a value of 50, because 50 is the center. But as the scale is minus 100%, it means when this is 100, this is just 0. And when this is 0, this is 100. So now we have this flip. Yeah, just scale by 100%, by minus 100%, and put here the value at which both should be equal. So around which it should flip. Okay, very nice. So let's look at a quick RAM preview of this. What we have here is now the first layer here moving, and all a bit slow here actually, because I have all this webcam recording and stuff like this going on. Anyway, and now it disappears and the second layer appears. Of course, this does not look very interesting yet. Yeah, it's somehow still a little bit too regular, and I want to have more flickering in here. So in other words, this opacity should change much faster and much more in a wiggly fashion. Yeah, of course I could add here now hundreds of keyframes to do this, but yeah, of course there's again a much easier way of doing this with iExpressions. I go to the iExpressions library and choose the basic wiggle that you already know from the first part of this tutorial series. So basic wiggle. This can not just be applied to positions, but also to 1D properties, like for example here the opacity. Yeah, so, and it can also be applied on top of these keyframes here. Yeah, in other words, if we set here, for example, the amplitude to something low, like maybe 30, around 30 or so, and we apply it, you can see the value becomes red. And remember, this was a value range where this was keyframed to 0, and now it wiggles here around this value 0. Yeah, it's always a little bit more than 0 or close to it. So it wiggles up to 27 around this value 0. And now here, where we have the keyframes, here it went up to 100, and now it wiggles around 100. Yeah, it's sometimes 100, sometimes a little bit less than 100. Here it's, for example, 95. Yeah, it wiggles around this value 100. Maybe we can also wiggle it a little bit faster. So let's say we want to have here something like 10 wiggles per second or so. So I don't have enabled auto apply. So apply and auto apply such that the changes here automatically adjust. Maybe this is also just a little bit too weak. So we do not want it to wiggle just 30 or 27 around this value, but much more, like 100. And so let's see how this now looks like. You can see here now values where it's really going quite big, drastic changes from 100 to only 35 or so. So I think now it should look much less regular than before. Yeah, still with the keyframes you can control. In this area mainly the zeros and ones should show through, and in this area mainly the text should show through, but it always changes a bit between the two. And see how little keyframes we really need. So we just have here the keyframes on the opacity of this one layer, and the opacity of the other layer follows, and also this wiggling is just done on top of these keyframes. Okay, finally, to give this some last touch, we can of course also add some effects. And what I want to do is I want to disturb here, or how is it called, to displace it a little bit. So there is this effect Turbulent Displace, and I apply this Turbulent Displace to these random text letters, and you can see now that these letters are now deformed like this. I change here the turbulent to horizontal displacement, which means it just displaced in this direction. And then I go here to this turbulent effect, and what I want to modify of this is actually its size. Yeah, the size is here 100. You can see if I remove this, if I lower this, for example, to 2, it is almost not displaced. And if I displace it a little bit more, like 16, it is distorted stronger or more intensive. And so the idea is now, of course, I could again keyframe here the size that it sometimes distorts more or less, or I could apply a wiggle expression. But what I want is I again want to connect this to the opacity of this layer that I've keyframed here. So in other words, whenever the letters disappear and the zeros and ones show through, the letters should be turbulently displaced. Yeah. So therefore, I take here this size parameter and link it to the to this opacity using again a linking expression. Since this is again a very simple link, I just use here this simple link 1D. Yeah, one 1D property connected to one other 1D property. Return. So I want to connect to this opacity here. Click. And what do I want to connect? Well, this size parameter here. Apply. Of course, I could again modify it a bit. So you can see currently this here has a value of 0, this of 2. This is because this can simply not be below 2. So size of this effect must always be 2. And if you go, for example, here, you can see when this is 51, this is also 51. If you do not want it to be turbulently displaced that much, of course, you could again scale it. Say, okay, I just want to be this here scaled by, let's say, 50%, and apply it. And then when this is 51, this is just half of it. But I think here a scale of 100% is quite nice. And now we have the effect whenever this layer here shows through with this opacity and this layer starts disappearing, it does not only disappear, but it also displaces, yeah, or it gets distorted. Of course, we could now also apply this distortion effect to this layer, and here we would rather have the opposite behavior, that when it shows through, it should distort less and not more. So we could again use the trick of scaling by -100%. Okay, but I'm not going to tweak this here anymore. I mean, you can imagine that you can add some more effects to make it look more, to make it look even more interesting. I hope I could convince you that This linking stuff makes your project much more efficient. Yeah, you have less keyframes, you can easier tweak and play them without having to adjust hundreds of keyframes again and again. And of course also that these random texts are very handy in cases where you need to create this kind of look, this kind of random text that you can use as backgrounds or whatever. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and see you next time for the last and fourth part of this tutorial series, where we cover then the physics simulation iExpressions.